Hello folks, here at OS Reviews. Today you're watching our video review of the Orion Cherry Mobile. This is a phone that shamelessly rips off the BlackBerry Tor and Curve products and also calls it a completely different name. With that being said, this is definitely a relic of the past because we definitely don't see any BlackBerries nowadays that kind of look like this. This is the previous generation models of BlackBerries that had this kind of look going for it. With that being said, we have the trackball on the bottom for navigation and also a QWERTY keyboard that's very reminiscent to RIM's BlackBerry products. And I have to say though, as far as clones are concerned, this one actually does a pretty good job. I don't know if I should use good as the word in terms of ripping off another product. Although usually we see a lot of clones for iPhones, this is actually a BlackBerry clone, which I didn't really experience before. So this is a first BlackBerry clone that I've actually encountered here at OS Reviews. Now there's a lot of kind of funny details going on with clones, and this phone is no exception. For example, the boot up screen is kind of interesting. As you can see, we can press on it for a few seconds, and we get a weird train that pops on the screen that's completely irrelevant to the phone. And there's a lot of these little weird things that kind of appear throughout the operating system that we don't really know what to make of, and definitely makes this phone less of a serious contender than really just a comical knockoff. With that being said, as a kind of clone device, it's not the worst clone we've seen. We've come across a lot of horrendous iPhone clones with resistive touchscreens that were very unresponsive and irresponsive and slow and difficult to navigate. But the Orion Cherry is actually pretty snappy. You can use the trackball and it's not too terribly slow, which was actually a shock to us. With that being said, the entire operating system runs on a version of Linux and Java, so it's not anything too fancy either. Functions are pretty limited. There's no app store. Although it looks like you're running on a version of BlackBerry OS, a lot of the programs are superficial and skin deep. So if we wanted to go into the MMS messaging feature, we don't have BlackBerry messaging. Instead, you have this kind of altered menu system. I can press on text messaging, for example, or MMS, and you get a completely different kind of interface that pops up that's not as sophisticated as the original or the real BlackBerry would ever be. So taking a look at the screen first, it's actually pretty, it's okay in terms of the brightness and the color saturation, but viewing angles are pretty bad. I mean, if you tilt the screen sideways, up and down, you can see how the color becomes blacked out almost instantaneously. With that being said, the build quality of the phone isn't bad. You have a metal rim that's crafted out of real metal, and the phone's keyboard actually feels pretty responsive. The keys are risen above the surface. They're also domed, and so it's pretty easy to type on for giving MMS text messages or basic emails. So it's not the worst keyboard we've seen, which is pretty good. You'll notice that there are two talk and end keys. It means that this phone has two SIM cards behind the back cover. Yes, this is an unlocked GSM device, and yes, you can use two SIMs, for example, T-Mobile and AT&T, but this is strictly 2G and not even 3G, so definitely not 4G connectivity, but at least you have two SIMs that you can swap between if you are in different zones. There's also a back key, a menu key, and also there is access to a TV key, because surprisingly there is also mobile TV on this phone. If you have an area that has mobile TV, although this is pretty rare here in the United States, it only works pretty well in Europe and in Asia, but there is an antenna in the back, which is quite bizarre. Taking a look at some other features on here, on the left-hand edge you have access to a camera shutter key, something that we actually did like, and on the back there's access to that digital fixed focus camera, about 2 megapixels, and there is a weird greenish kind of hue to the camera that we'll show you later on. There's a loudspeaker that is very loud, and there's also a LED flash, which is actually pretty decent. On the bottom, there is a proprietary charging port that you can use. You can also use the micro USB port, which is kind of redundant. There's also a volume rocker and a soft touch key for locking the product, and in addition there's a 3.5mm jack for listening to music. So you have to remove the back cover to access the micro SIM card slot and also the SIM cards, which is a bit unfortunate. There's no hot swapping there. As far as phone abilities go, the phone quality on this particular phone isn't too bad, although the microphone is very, very tinny and is kind of distorted, but reception is surprisingly strong, and battery life is also very good, so it lasted me about 3 days before I had to recharge it. With that being said, there's not too many apps on here, so it's not like I'm browsing the web every day or checking my Facebook and Twitter accounts, because there isn't a Facebook or a Twitter app on here. It's not a true smartphone. Some other programs on here, there is a phone book on here that you can select through, a calendar, again, that looks nothing like the actual BlackBerry OS. There is a Opera Mini browser that's actually Opera Mini, which is pretty surprising. There's also a multimedia tab for you to watch TV with. Doesn't really work here in the States. There's a camera, a voice recorder and also a video recorder and an MP3 player. Taking a look at the camera, again, we have this very weird greenish kind of look to it. It's kind of the screen. If you tilt it back and forth, you kind of see it, and then it kind of disappears. Camera, not very good, but it actually works for some basic emergency situations. The flash is automatic, and it's very, very quick to capture. You can also zoom in and out. So not the worst camera we've seen, but certainly not the best. Again, you have a sound recorder and also an FM radio. You have to plug in a pair of 3.5mm jacks to actually use that feature. So plugging on the menu key here, you have some other functions on here. There are services, so that's giving you access to the web for the web browsing. There's also an alarm that you can set that, again, looks something like BlackBerry OS. Under extras, you'll find access to all your other programs like a calculator, a converter for health. It just records your body mass index. And there's also a stopwatch and an ebook reader, which is pretty mediocre. It's basically a text reader that displays your text line by line without any spacing on the screen. So it's very small and not a very enjoyable experience. It's kind of like reading a book on your MP3 player or something like that. So there's a file manager, which is pretty good. Manage connections for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So yes, there is Wi-Fi in here, so you can browse the web using that, although the built-in browser for Opera Mini is still pretty clunky and not the best experience, and also the processor is very, very pokey. Bluetooth, though, does work pretty well for listening to music. There's no GPS, however, for navigation. Over here, you have a calculator, and there's also access again to that browser. Taking a look at some other programs on here, you have access to a client for Facebook. This is not really a client, it's just a link or a shortcut to the web. It takes you into the web browser and goes to facebook.com. And the experience, again, is very slow because the processor on here is pretty low. It's, I believe, about 200 megahertz or something like that. You have eBuddy as a client on there. Again, there's no Twitter, no YouTube client or anything like that. We can tap on the Fun and Games. These are run by Java, so you can see we have Opera Mini, Snap to Google Maps, but no navigation, Docs Viewer, and surprisingly, Mobile Office. This allows you to actually view Word, Excel, and PowerPoint documents, but you can't edit them, so the experience is a bit limited and stunted, but at least we do have that feature. Again, navigation in general isn't too bad. It's actually fairly responsive with the scroll wheel or the kind of the navigational controls on here, so that's a bit surprising, at least for me. There's also games. There's only just one game built in, but you can install any Java game and it will work. So this is Magic Sushi. As you can hear, the speaker on the back is very, very loud, despite being on the tinier side of the spectrum. And you can definitely play this game, but it's a bit limited by what you can do, although it's a nice feature to have, I guess, better than no games at all on the particular phone. Some more sample shots using the camera. Again, not terrible, but again, not anything too extraordinary either. You can see colors are actually pretty good under brighter environments. They're pretty well saturated, surprisingly, and so overall, not the worst camera we've seen. So a lot better than some other clones we've encountered. That we were kind of confused about was the accelerometer. You do have an accelerometer on here for some basic games and web browsing, but it doesn't really come into play too much, except if you want to change the wallpaper. You shake the phone and the wallpaper, it changes. So this is a very bizarre implementation and the only use we actually found for the accelerometer on here. So this is a kind of strange feature that we didn't really understand or really know why they put this on here. So every time you drive or hit a bump in your car, this wallpaper on your phone actually will change. And you can probably change this feature to turn it on and off in the settings, although we couldn't actually find the tab. So this is kind of a bizarre. The most surprising aspect about this phone is that it's not completely terrible. If you do need a very basic phone for kind of taking calls with, or just using it to send some text messages and occasionally browse the web using Wi-Fi, it's not a poor choice, especially because the retail price is only about $50, which is very inexpensive. With that being said, even though it's not the worst clone we've seen, it still is kind of a diss, I would say, to RIM and BlackBerry. And so with the falling price of unlocked BlackBerry devices anyways, you can get them secondhand on eBay. I wouldn't say this is a very compelling device because you can get a BlackBerry Tor or a BlackBerry Curve on eBay now for about the same price. So it kind of defeats the purpose of something like this. So anyways, this has been a video first look / review, and you can definitely check out our full review / post on our website.